Well, welcome back to the channel. We're continuing to talk about the in-laws, whether it's a daughter-in-law, a son-in-law, mother-in-law, father-in-law. Sometimes relationships with our adult children and their spouses doesn't feel like a Disney movie. So what do we do when it feels messy, stressful, even unfixable? Well, this was a topic that was brought to me by several members of our community, and it is sort of about friendship, right? Because you want everyone to get along in your family. But I've come to realize that some of the hardest heartbreaks in life don't come from romantic relationships, they come from family. And so last week we talked about navigating the emotional landscape of being an in-law, that new dynamic when your child gets married and suddenly there's another person who holds a big piece of their heart, maybe a little bit of that heart that you used to have. So today we're going to go a little deeper into what happens when those relationships just become difficult. Maybe they start off difficult, disruptive, maybe even painful. When your daughter or your son marries someone who changes the entire rhythm of your family. And sometimes you feel shut out, replaced, blamed, or when you find yourself walking on eggshells, being careful, constantly careful to not upset your child or their spouse or whatever kind of fragile piece you're barely holding together. No one likes that feeling. So there's a lot of emotional weight when you feel pushed out. It goes back to being a little girl on the playground. We don't like to feel left out. And being pushed out of your child's life is one of the most painful things I think a mother can experience. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. Maybe there's a missed invitation, a canceled visit at the last minute, a text that goes unanswered for a week, maybe two, or that look you get from your kid that, hey, mom, knock it off, you're overstepping, or seriously, mom? And what's worse is it often happens without warning. There's no big argument or even a series of missteps. You just feel the subtle shift, and you can point to it. It's just this slow drifting exclusion that leaves you wondering, what did I do? And of course, we always think, our first thought is that we did something, especially when there's no big drama, argument, problem between the two of you. So what do you do if your son-in-law is the difficult one, or maybe even your daughter-in-law? Maybe they're possessive, insecure, or competitive. We can pick up on those things. There are people who want full control of their partner's world. They decide who's in, they decide who's out, and sometimes it's on us because we've raised a dependent child. And now as a young adult, they're seeking out a partner who they can transfer their dependence to, replacing your emotional bond, the emotional bond you have with them, with this new person. So step back and think about, how did we get to the dance? It can feel like a huge betrayal, but maybe it was learned behavior or habit. And in that case, it was never going to end well. One woman wrote to me that her mother-in-law ignores her and her children and showers her own daughter's children with gifts and time and attention, because she obviously favors one side of the family, her daughter and her daughter's husband, and kind of alienates this woman who's married to her son. And it's a brutal spot to be in, but sometimes you're paying for the relationship, as a wife, you're paying for the relationship your spouse had with their parents, right? You've walked in and you've taken their son away. Or there's the mom who shared that her son's wife is very attached to her own parents. They're together constantly, her son and his wife, only live 10 minutes away from her and drive by her house almost daily, but they never have the time to stop in. They only have time for her family. And she hasn't seen her son for more than a few minutes here and there all year. Well, she's hurt, confused, and left holding birthday gifts that never get opened. And it can be a lonely feeling, like, how did I get here? And that's really what emotional distance looks like. It's not always rejection in words, but sometimes the rejection is in time and attention and those little things. Now, granted, there's a different dynamic between sons and daughters, and that's kind of what got us to the dance, right? The relationship we often have with our sons can be very different than the one we have with our daughters. And I find with my daughter, there's more of an emotional back and forth. We've got a kind of a history of talking and sharing and kind of being in each other's business, for better or for worse. I don't think it's always perfect. But with my sons, I find there's a little bit of a natural distance that happens even when they get serious girlfriends. And especially if the girl's family is tight-knit. I can already see the holidays. And that's the hard truth. When you're the mother of a son, your influence can be gone overnight. And not because your son loves you less, but because he's trying to build a life with someone new. He's the man of the house. It sounds old, but he's the man of the house. And he's also trying to keep peace with his spouse. And so he'll often lose a connection with you before he upsets his spouse. And I find that many people only have enough emotional bandwidth for one key person in their life. And yes, it's part of maturing. They're young. They aren't to the point yet where they can handle it all. And you have to understand that that's not betrayal. It's just human nature. We all went through it, but it was a long time ago and maybe we forget it. It's hard to balance that loyalty, and often someone ends up feeling hurt. I can remember some problems with my own mom going through that. So how do you control what you can't control? So what can you do when you are on the outside looking in and you can't control the situation? Well, you can't force your way in, right? That never works. It causes a lot of problems, and it reinforces the narrative that you're difficult, you're the problem, you can't let go. So here's what you can do. Number one, keep your dignity. Don't chase, don't beg, and don't compete. There's no competition. You don't have to audition for love. Number two, stay consistent. Send birthday cards, extend invitations, keep the door open, but do it without expectation. That's the hard part, giving without attaching your self-worth to whether they respond or how quickly they respond. Don't put your expectations, your own expectations, on your grown kids, because 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work out. If they never come to pick up that birthday gift, then next plan, send cards only. Number 3, protect your peace. If being around them feels painful or even toxic, it's okay to step back. You're not cutting them off. You're just protecting your well-being. Putting a little distance can often solve a lot of problems. Number 4, build your own joy. It's easy to let our children's choices define our happiness. And they do for most of their lives. But the truth is, your story didn't end when your kids got married. Their story didn't end. You just changed chapters. You get to start rewriting a new you. So what do you do, though, when you feel blamed or misunderstood? So many moms tell me that the kids have made me the villain in their story. Well, and maybe you made a mistake, a little misstep, you spoke up once too many, many times, and so now you're labeled difficult. Or maybe you tried to be helpful and you were accused of being nosy or controlling. Helicopter mom, I've heard that one. When people are insecure, they rewrite the narrative to justify their choices, and usually they're bad choices. It's not fair, but you can't control the story they tell. Only you can control. The only thing you can control is how you want to live your life. And those false narratives, the best way to deal with them is quiet consistency. Let your kindness and your steadiness tell the story over time. And don't be too hard on yourself if you did make a mistake along the way. Give yourself grace and get back to being who you truly are. Time will tell the story. You just have to be patient. And then there's quiet acceptance. So if the situation is just bad, peace becomes more valuable than being right, being wrong. You need to stop explaining, trying to get them to understand your feelings, because it's exhausting. And quite honestly, if they're not ready for it, it's painful. So just release it. Turn your attention to something more manageable, more realistic. Don't have unrealistic expectations of them. Stop chasing what's closed and start putting your energy into what's open. And maybe that's another child. Maybe it's grandchildren who adore you, a sister, a great aunt, a friend who feels like family. Peace sometimes means accepting what won't change and pouring our time and our treasure into the people that appreciate us. And if you're not feeling appreciated, there needs to be some counterbalance in your life. Otherwise, you just stay too focused in. It's a really difficult conversation to have because we want that Disney story. We raise our children to be independent, to build their own lives, and then we have to live with the distance that independence often brings. What I tell myself is I'm still a good mother. I'm still worthy of love, and my value and yours is not measured by how often the phone rings or how many texts we get every week. So, leave your heart open. If it's feeling forced, it isn't love. So don't be afraid to step back, because the most important love you can show is letting go and adding a little peace to your life and to their life. Well, next week, I think we're going to talk about dealing with the new spouse's family, and how do we manage holidays? How do we keep ourselves from getting hurt when the schedule doesn't include you, but it includes them? And when you start seeing less and less of your children for important celebrations like birthdays and Thanksgiving, Christmas, how do you manage your expectations when you feel like you're competing with another family? People often say, I pretend they don't exist, but we don't always have that luxury anymore. So if you have anything you'd like to add to that conversation, I hope you'll send it to me and I can share some of your stories so that it will help other members of our community. Well, thanks for stopping by. Obviously, I'm back out on the porch in New Orleans. I had a Halloween weekend with my college roommates. I do that pretty much every year. And we had a great time eating and checking out the skeleton house. So I'll add a couple of pictures at the end of this. But I look forward to seeing you next weekend as we continue this conversation about the in-laws. Friend or foe, or I just don't want to talk about it. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.